They laughed when Ava Brooks walked into the boardroom because nobody in that room believed a woman like her could belong there. The first laugh came from a man sitting near the windows, a silver-haired executive with a watch bright enough to catch every chandelier reflection above the 72nd floor. He barely looked up before saying, "I think the cleaning crew got lost again." The joke crossed the long walnut table with the smoothness of people who had spent years mistaking cruelty for confidence. 12 executives sat beneath soft recessed lights, while rain blurred Manhattan behind floor-to-ceiling glass. They were surrounded by espresso cups, leather portfolios, merger documents, and the quiet luxury of a room designed to make outsiders feel smaller. Ava stood just inside the massive double doors with a visitor badge clipped to her dark blazer and one hand resting against the strap of her worn black bag. She did not smile. She did not answer. She only looked at the empty chair near the head of the table, the one reserved for the incoming majority shareholder. That was the first thing Charles Whitmore noticed. Not her face, not her badge, not her silence. The chair. Charles sat beneath the glowing Whitmore Global Capital logo with silver cufflinks flashing under the light, carrying the calm authority of a man who had spent 4 decades believing every room bent toward him eventually. His sharp blue eyes moved over Ava for less than 2 seconds before dropping back to the merger documents in front of him. "The catering entrance is downstairs," he said. More laughter followed. Someone muttered, "Security is getting generous." Another executive said, "Maybe HR sent her up for the diversity optics." Ava walked forward. Her heels made a controlled sound against marble, not loud, but steady enough to thin the laughter one step at a time. She passed the wall of former chairmen, all men, all pale, all frozen in portraits that seemed to stare through her as if history itself had been trained not to see certain people. She stopped beside the empty chair. A heavy-set board member frowned. "Ma'am, this meeting is restricted." Ava looked at him. "I know." Her voice was quiet enough to make the room listen before it understood why. Charles finally raised his eyes again, irritation replacing dismissal. "Then you also know you are interrupting a $4 billion merger discussion." Ava reached into her bag, removed a black folder, and placed it on the table. The sound landed harder than paper should have. "Actually," she said, "that discussion now requires my approval." One man laughed again, but this time it died before reaching anyone else. Ava opened the folder and slid a stack of acquisition documents toward the center of the table. Blackstone Ridge finalized the transfer at 4:17 p.m. Eastern Time. 51% controlling interest in Whitmore Global Capital. Nobody moved at first. Then the room began to change in tiny ways. Fingers stopped tapping screens. A pen slipped from someone's hand. A younger executive grabbed the documents and scanned them with annoyance, then confusion, then open fear. "Charles," he whispered. Charles stood and took the papers from him. His eyes moved across signatures, approvals, escrow stamps, voting rights assignments. Every line was clean. Every transfer was legal. Every signature was real. Outside, rain hit the glass harder, or maybe the room had simply become quiet enough to hear it. Richard Ellison, the company's chief legal officer, sat midway down the table with his hands folded neatly beside a closed leather notebook. He did not speak. His expression remained professional, almost neutral. That neutrality made him look safer than the others. It also made him harder to read. Charles lifted his gaze from the documents. "Who are you?" Ava looked directly at him. "Ava Brooks." The name did not explode in the room. It moved through it silently. Charles's face did not collapse. He was too practiced for that. But something failed at the edge of his control, a small tightening around the jaw, a brief pause before the next breath, a flicker of recognition he buried almost immediately. Most of the board missed it. Ava did not. Richard seemed to miss it too, or pretended to. Charles placed the documents on the table with care. "Everyone out." Several executives looked startled. "Charles, Tokyo opens in less than 5 hours." "Out." Chairs moved. Tablets were collected. The same people who had laughed now left with their eyes lowered, though a few looked back at Ava, as if she had become a problem too large to insult. Richard rose last. He gathered his notebook, gave Ava a courteous nod, and said, "Ms. Brooks, congratulations on the acquisition. I expect there will be procedural matters to clarify." His tone was calm, almost respectful. Then he left. When the doors closed, The boardroom held only Ava, Charles, the storm, and the empty chair. Charles looked at the documents again. Brooks, he said, not as a question, but as if testing whether the name still had weight. Ava waited. He did not continue. Instead, he walked toward the windows and looked out at the city. That name should have stayed out of this building. The sentence landed between them like a locked drawer sliding open by 1 inch. Ava reached into her coat pocket and placed a small silver key on the table. Charles looked at it, then at her. For the first time, irritation gave way to caution. What is that? Something the building forgot. That is not an answer. Neither was what you did to my father. His eyes sharpened. Careful. Ava's voice stayed soft. I learned careful from Daniel Brooks. The name struck him harder than her own had. His fingers curled once against his palm before he controlled them. Your father, Charles said, made choices he did not understand. No, Ava replied. He understood exactly what he saw. That was why he became dangerous. Before Charles could answer, the boardroom doors opened again. Richard Ellison stepped in with a tablet in one hand and a phone in the other. I apologize for the interruption, he said, still composed. The acquisition news has leaked. Financial media is already calling this a hostile takeover, and 3 major investors are demanding confirmation before overseas markets open. Charles turned sharply. Who leaked it? Richard looked at Ava, then back at Charles. Unknown. Ava watched him carefully. Convenient timing. Richard did not react. Most timing is convenient to someone. Then he opened a document on his tablet. There is another issue. Ownership transfer is valid, subject to final procedural verification. But immediate operational control is not automatic under emergency instability provisions. Charles's face tightened. Richard's voice remained even, almost regretful. Section 9(4) of the bylaws. If a controlling transfer creates material risk to market stability or regulatory exposure, appointment authority may be delayed pending emergency board review. Ava looked at him. So I own the company, but I cannot run it. Richard met her eyes. For 48 hours, possibly longer if regulators intervene. And who decides whether regulators need to intervene? The board, council, and the facts. Ava looked at Charles. Do those still live in this building? Charles did not answer. That silence told her the first truth of the night. She had not walked into a throne room. She had walked into a machine. And somewhere inside the machine, someone had already pulled the emergency lever. After Richard left, Charles did not explain Daniel Brooks. Not immediately. That was what made him more frightening. He stood by the glass wall, watching rain slide over Manhattan, while Ava stood beside the table with the key between them. For almost a full minute, the only sound was the weather. You think this is justice, he said finally. I think justice is what people call the truth after it survives powerful men. Charles turned, and for a moment the old boardroom king returned. You have no idea what this company survived 20 years ago. Ava picked up the key and held it between 2 fingers. I know what my family did not survive. His eyes moved to the key again. Where did you get that? From a woman who cleaned out my mother's apartment after she died. Your mother is dead? The question sounded genuine enough to surprise both of them. Ava did not give him the satisfaction of seeing it matter. 7 years ago. Charles looked away first. I am sorry. No, Ava said. You are late. He absorbed that without answering. Ava moved toward the conference screen and connected a small tablet. She did not show him the full file. She showed him one image. A scanned employee badge. Daniel Brooks. Night maintenance supervisor. The old photograph appeared on the wall in dull corporate color, her father younger than she had been when she bought the company, smiling with the awkward pride of a man who believed a badge meant belonging. Charles stared at it too long. Ava watched him. You remember him. Many people worked here. That was not a no. Charles lowered his voice. Your father was involved in a difficult internal matter. Kingston. This time Charles did not hide the reaction quickly enough. Who told you that word? Ava shut off the screen. My father wrote it once in the margin of a maintenance log. He underlined it 3 times. Charles stepped toward her. If you have old company records, you need to turn them over to legal. Legal buried him. Legal protected the institution. From what? Charles stopped. The question hung there, alive and unanswered. He looked at the key again. Locker B14, he said quietly. Ava felt the cold move through her. She had not told him the number. Charles realized his mistake a second later. The room changed. Ava put the key back into her pocket. So you do remember. He looked at her, and this time his face held no dismissal. Only warning. Some doors were locked for a reason. Then you should have made sure poor people did not keep keys. By midnight, Whitmore Global had issued a statement confirming the ownership transfer while announcing a 48-hour emergency governance review. By 2 a.m., financial commentators were asking who Ava Brooks was, where her money came from, why Blackstone Ridge had sold controlling interests so suddenly, and whether a revenge-driven outsider had just destabilized thousands of jobs. By 5 a.m., headlines were no longer laughing. They were hunting. And Ava, sitting alone in a temporary conference room 2 floors below the executive suite with her access badge suddenly disabled for half the internal systems she now owned, understood something her father had told her when she was a child. Money protects people until truth walks into the room. But truth, she was learning again, still had to survive the lawyers waiting behind the door. The next morning, the lobby of Whitmore Global felt less like a financial institution and more like a building holding its breath. Rainwater streaked the revolving doors. Reporters crowded behind barricades outside, shouting questions every time anyone in a suit approached. Television screens above the reception desk flashed red banners about the surprise takeover, the suspended merger, the mystery investor, and the possible collapse of confidence before the opening bell. Employees came through security with coffee cups gripped too tightly, eyes moving toward the elevators, phones buzzing with group chats and news alerts. Ava entered through the main doors at 7:10 a.m., not through the executive garage. That was deliberate. She wanted the building to see her before the board defined her. Her dark blazer was the same one from the night before. Her hair was pulled back simply. Her visitor badge had been replaced with a temporary executive credential that worked on the lobby turnstiles and almost nowhere else. Heads turned immediately. Some employees stared with curiosity. Others looked away, afraid even eye contact might become political. Near the north hallway, an older janitor pushing a yellow mop bucket stopped so suddenly the bucket rolled into the wall. His face changed first with confusion, then disbelief, then something Ava had not expected to feel so sharply. Recognition. "Little Ava," he whispered. The lobby noise seemed to bend around those 2 words. Ava stopped. The man was older now, his back slightly curved, his mustache fully gray, but she knew him. Marcus Hill. He had worked nights with her father. He had once given her vending machine crackers when her mother's paycheck had disappeared into rent and late fees. "Mr. Marcus," she said softly. His eyes filled before he could hide it. "Lord, child. Your daddy would." He stopped himself because there were security guards nearby, and because grief had rules in public places. Ava gave him a small nod. "I need to talk to you later." Marcus looked around, suddenly cautious. "You be careful in this building," he said under his breath. Some doors stay locked because somebody powerful still got something behind them. Before Ava could answer, an elevator opened and 2 executives stepped out, both going silent when they saw her with him. Marcus lowered his eyes, placed both hands on the mop handle, and became invisible again by habit. Ava watched it happen, that old reflex of survival, and something cold settled in her chest. Upstairs, Richard Ellison had already assembled the emergency board review in Conference Center A. The room looked different in daylight. Less glamorous, more surgical. No bourbon glasses. No loose laughter. Only tablets, legal folders, nervous faces, and Charles Whitmore sitting at the far end with his tie perfectly knotted but his eyes shadowed from a night without sleep. Richard stood as Ava entered. "Ms. Brooks," he said, "thank you for coming." Ava looked at the empty seat beside Charles. Then she looked at the seat they had placed for her midway down the table. "That is not my chair." Several board members shifted. Richard smiled with the smoothness of a man who had billed thousands of hours for not showing emotion. "Until the review concludes, seating arrangements remain unchanged." Ava sat in the wrong chair because she understood the trap. If she fought the symbol too early, they would call her unstable. Richard began with a presentation. Market risk. Investor confidence, governance continuity, fiduciary responsibility. He spoke for 12 minutes without once saying the word father, janitor, frame-up, racism, or theft. When he finished, he folded his hands and looked at her. "We are prepared to recognize your ownership stake after procedural verification. However, immediate installation as CEO is impossible under current circumstances." Ava leaned back slightly. Impossible or inconvenient. Necessary, Richard said. You acquired control through a distressed block sale from Blackstone Ridge less than 24 hours before a major merger decision. The acquisition news leaked before formal internal notice. You have already referenced confidential historical files you may not be authorized to possess. And your personal connection to a prior internal investigation creates significant conflict exposure. Charles's eyes moved toward Ava at that last phrase. Ava did not look at him. You mean my father? Richard's expression did not change. I mean the Daniel Brooks matter. The Daniel Brooks matter was a lie. Then prove it lawfully. The room went silent. Ava smiled faintly for the first time. There it is. Richard tilted his head. There what is? The part where the truth has to ask permission from the people who buried it. Charles closed his eyes briefly. Richard continued as if she had said nothing. Until the review concludes, your access will remain limited. The merger vote will be delayed, and all public communications regarding historic allegations must be approved by legal counsel. Ava looked around the table. And if I refuse? Richard tapped the folder in front of him. We seek injunctive relief before close of business and notify regulators that you may be acting on unlawfully obtained confidential information. He paused, letting the sentence settle. I would strongly advise against that. The board members watched Ava now with something close to hope. They wanted her to erupt. They wanted anger they could quote. They wanted the woman they had laughed at to become the danger Richard was describing. Ava gave them nothing. For 20 years, she said quietly, this company survived by making quiet people carry loud lies. I can wait 48 hours. Richard's smile barely moved. Wise. Ava stood. But while you review my right to sit in a chair, I will be reviewing every reason you are so afraid of locker B14. The words did not make Richard flinch. That made the room trust him more. But Ava noticed the way Charles looked at him. It was not suspicion yet. It was the beginning of memory asking itself whether it had missed something important. By noon, Ava's internal access was frozen beyond basic facilities, and her name had become a weapon on television. Unknown investor. Possible activist. Personal vendetta. Threat to jobs. The phrase, cleaning crew got lost, never appeared in the coverage. People in expensive rooms rarely leaked their own cruelty when they could leak someone else's motive instead. Ava spent the afternoon in a borrowed office with no assistant, no access to executive archives, and a view of a brick wall across the alley. Her phone buzzed every few minutes with calls from attorneys, journalists, and investors she did not yet trust. At 3:18 p.m., she received a message from an unknown number. It contained no greeting, only one sentence. Look at Schedule 12. Not the merger deck. The side letter. Ava stared at it. A file followed, but half the document was redacted, and several pages were missing. It was not a smoking gun. It was worse. It was a door cracked open just enough to show movement behind it. Page 12 contained language about legacy employee obligations being reassigned to a transitional subsidiary after the merger closed. The words were clean, dry, legal. But Ava had spent years studying how harm hid inside language designed to exhaust the reader. A subsidiary scheduled for dissolution. Legacy obligations moved before review. Employee benefit liabilities separated from executive compensation structures. She read the clause 3 times and felt the past reaching forward. At 4:30, she went to the cafeteria-level east stairwell. She did not know who she would find. The woman waiting there was young, nervous, and trying not to look nervous. Her badge read Nina Patel, compliance analyst. You should not have sent that, Ava said. Nina gave a small, humorless laugh. You should not have opened it. Why send only part of the document? Nina looked toward the stairwell door. Because I only have part of it. The full-side letter disappeared from the compliance folder yesterday morning. My access was downgraded after I flagged Schedule 12. Who downgraded it? My supervisor said legal requested it. Richard Ellison? Nina hesitated. I do not know. That is the problem. His name is never on the first request. It appears 3 approvals later, when everything has already been sanitized. That answer was better than certainty. Certainty could be planted. Fear was harder to fake. Ava lowered her voice. Why risk this? Nina's face tightened. My mother works custodial on 39. She has arthritis in both hands and still comes in before sunrise because the health plan barely covers what she needs. If that side letter does what I think it does, people like her lose first. People upstairs call it legacy liability. Downstairs, it is medication, rent, and whether someone can retire before their body quits. Ava studied her. What does this have to do with Kingston? Nina shook her head. I do not know. I only know older staff stop talking when that word comes up. And I know one more thing. What? Nina took a folded page from her sleeve and pressed it into Ava's palm. Archive access log. Sub-basement. Locker B, 14. Opened 5 years after Daniel Brooks died. Ava unfolded the page. The name was blacked out. The authorization source remained visible. Legal department. She looked back at Nina. Who opened it? Nina's eyes filled with fear. That is what scares me. Someone removed the answer before they let me find the question. Ava did not come alone that night. She came with silence, memory, and Marcus Hill, because there were parts of Whitmore Global no executive map could explain better than a man who had spent 30 years walking its unseen corridors. They opened Locker B, 14 after midnight, not because midnight was dramatic, but because the building told more truth after executives left. The sub-basement corridor smelled of paper dust, concrete, metal shelves, and industrial cleaner. Marcus carried a flashlight, even though the overhead lights buzzed above them. Habit, he said. Down here, lights work until they don't. Ava almost smiled. My father used to say that. Marcus nodded, then looked away. Your father said a lot people upstairs should have written down. Locker B, 14 sat along the far wall, gray metal, dented near the bottom hinge, ordinary enough to be ignored by anyone who had never loved the man who used it. Ava held the small silver key for a long moment before turning it in the lock. The door opened with a reluctant scrape. Inside was not the treasure chest she had feared and hoped for. It was emptier than it should have been. A folded maintenance jacket, 2 logbooks wrapped in plastic, 1 envelope with brittle tape, a photograph of Ava at 12, sitting on a cafeteria counter with a vending machine sandwich in her hand. No flash drive, no full audit file, no clean confession waiting patiently for justice. Marcus leaned closer. Something is missing. Ava looked at the back of the locker. A rectangular dust mark remained on the metal shelf, clean at the center, gray around the edges. Something had sat there for years and had been removed. Recently? No, not recently. Carefully, Marcus lifted one of the logbooks. This tape is wrong. Wrong how? Danny always used blue painter's tape. Said clear tape cracked in cold storage. Ava looked at the seal. Clear tape. Newer than the pages. Too careful. She opened the logbook. Most entries were ordinary. Light replacement, freight elevator malfunction, conference room spill, broken thermostat, late pickup on 71. Then she reached a page with 3 lines cut out so cleanly the blade had barely marked the sheet below. The next page held 1 phrase in Daniel's handwriting. If they move it, check what they leave behind. Ava read it twice. Marcus stared over her shoulder. Move what? Ava checked the envelope. Inside were photocopies of 3 partial memos. None complete. A transfer code without a destination. A Kingston reference without names. A handwritten note from Daniel that read, not finance. Legal told them before morning. Ava felt the air change around her. Legal. Not Charles. Not only Charles. Somewhere deep in the corridor, something clicked. Marcus raised the flashlight. The hallway was empty. Then Ava's phone vibrated. The message was from Richard Ellison. Ms. Brooks, I strongly advise you to avoid restricted archive areas until the governance review is complete. Evidence obtained improperly rarely survives contact with a courtroom. Ava looked at the open locker, the missing rectangle of dust, the cut logbook page, and the message on her screen. How did he know? Marcus's face hardened. Because down here ain't as forgotten as they want you to think. The locker had not given her the truth. It had given her proof that someone else had reached it first. By morning, Richard did not need to deny the locker. He only needed to make it dangerous. At 9 a.m., he presented the board with an emergency memorandum titled Archive Breach and Market Manipulation Exposure. It was clean, bloodless, and devastating. Ava had accessed a restricted company locker while under governance review. The locker had previously been opened by unknown personnel. Its contents had an uncertain chain of custody. Any public reference to those contents could trigger regulatory scrutiny, shareholder litigation, and claims that Ava acquired control while planning to weaponize confidential information. Richard did not raise his voice once. He did not need to. Fear did the work for him. We are not arguing whether Ms. Brooks has personal pain, he told the board. We are asking whether personal pain is now controlling a financial institution employing thousands of people. The sentence was made for headlines. By noon, it had become one. By 1:30, Ava's access was reduced again. By 2 o'clock, a temporary court order restricted use of any materials taken from locker B14. By 3 o'clock, Whitmore's crisis team released a statement expressing concern for employee stability and responsible governance. The phrase sounded humane until Ava read it twice. They were turning the workers into a barricade. Downstairs, the effect was immediate. Employees who had looked at Ava with curiosity the day before now watched her with caution. In the cafeteria, a trader said too loudly that revenge was not a business plan. Near the elevators, 2 assistants whispered that if the stock fell again, departments would be cut. In a maintenance hallway, Ava heard the sentence that hurt worse than the boardroom laughter. Maybe she is right, a woman said. But right does not pay rent if this place collapses. Ava stopped walking. The woman turned and froze when she saw her. Ava said nothing. There was nothing clean to say. Later, Marcus found her near the old freight elevator. People downstairs are scared of you now, he said gently. Ava looked at him. Of me? Of what follows you? He leaned both hands on the mop handle. Truth sounds different when somebody rich is about to lose a bonus. Sounds like justice. Truth sounds different when you got 2 kids and you hear layoffs. Sounds like danger. Ava looked toward the lobby where reporters pressed against the glass. I came here for them. I know. Marcus's eyes softened. But they do not know that yet. That night, Ava sat alone in the borrowed office with the cut logbook page in front of her and understood the shape of the defeat. Richard had not beaten her by proving she was wrong. He had beaten her by making the people she wanted to protect afraid of being right. Evelyn Carter arrived at the lobby just before closing, wearing a beige raincoat, orthopedic shoes, and the frightened determination of a woman who had spent 20 years rehearsing a sentence she never said. She refused to leave her name with security. She only said, "Tell Ava Brooks the first packet was different." Ava met her in a second-floor visitor's room, away from the cameras and the executives who now seemed to appear wherever Ava walked. Evelyn placed a manila envelope on the table but kept one hand on it. I worked HR during Kingston, she said. Records processing, termination packets, severance notices, appeal rights. Ava waited. Evelyn looked at the envelope as if it might bite her. Your father's first packet did not look like the one that went out. Ava's throat tightened. What did it say? Evelyn slid out one photocopied page. The text was faded, but readable. Daniel Brooks. Administrative suspension pending internal inquiry. Access record inconsistent with allegation. Recommend additional review. Ava read the sentence again. Access record inconsistent with allegation. This would have saved him. Evelyn's eyes filled. It should have slowed them down. Who changed it? Evelyn swallowed. That is what I do not know for certain. Ava looked up. For certain. Evelyn reached into the envelope and removed a second page. The final termination packet. Stronger language. No severance. No appeal. Reputational risk to company. At the bottom, where the author line should have been clear, only 2 initials remained on the copy. R.E. Ava looked at Evelyn. Richard Ellison. Evelyn closed her eyes. Maybe. There were 2 legal officers with those initials then. One died 6 years ago. One runs the department now. That uncertainty cut deeper than certainty because it kept the door open. Evelyn leaned forward. But I heard a phrase that night. I came back after hours because I left my keys near the HR printer. The conference room door was not fully closed. I heard someone say Daniel was low enough to be believable. Ava went still. Evelyn continued, voice trembling now. I did not see who said it. I only heard the room go quiet afterward. Then someone else said the public would not read access logs. Ava looked down at the page until the letters blurred. Low enough to be believable. It was not a full confession. Not yet. But it was a fingerprint left on the knife. Can you testify to that? Ava asked. Evelyn nodded, then shook her head, then nodded again. I am afraid. So was my father. Evelyn covered her mouth with one hand. I know. Ava gathered the pages carefully. They still did not prove enough. But now the lie had a shape, initials, and a sentence too cruel for any innocent room to invent. The first article from Mara Whitfield did not save Ava. It complicated her. The headline asked questions about Daniel Brooks, Kingston, pension cuts, and the strange timing of the Blackstone Ridge sale. But the article also asked whether Ava's takeover had been fueled by personal grievance rather than fiduciary judgment. That was Mara's gift and her threat. She did not choose heroes easily. By 8 a.m., employees were reading the piece everywhere. By 9:30, Charles summoned Ava to his office. The room overlooked Midtown through rain-bright glass and displayed the usual museum of power. Awards, photographs with senators, books no one touched, art expensive enough to be mistaken for thought. Charles stood behind his desk, not by the window this time. That mattered. He wanted the desk between them. Mara Whitfield is not your ally, he said. Ava stopped near the chairs but did not sit. I did not ask her to be. No. You only fed a fire next to a building full of people. That sounds almost like concern. His eyes hardened. Do not confuse my guilt with permission. Ava studied him. There he was again, not the tired man from the window, but the institution wearing a human face. You know Daniel was framed. I know Daniel was caught inside something he did not fully understand. That is not the same thing. It is closer to the truth than the story you want. Ava felt anger rise, but kept it beneath her voice. The story I want. Charles came around the desk slowly. You want one villain, one confession, one clean correction large enough to make the past bearable. That is not how companies rot, Ava. They rot through committees, signatures, advice, silence, compromise. Everyone touches the lie a little. That way no one has to feel like they built it, including you, especially me. For one moment, honesty appeared. Then power covered it again. But if you force this too fast, Whitmore collapses, employees suffer, Blackstone walks away clean, and your father becomes the name attached to a second disaster. Ava stepped closer. Is that a warning or a threat? Charles looked at her without blinking. At this level, they are often the same thing. The office door opened, and Richard entered with 2 crisis advisors behind him. Charles did not look surprised. Ava understood then that whatever guilt Charles carried, he had not chosen her side. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The noon address was not allowed until Richard realized blocking it would look worse than letting it happen. That was how Ava knew he had prepared something else. Across 72 floors, employees gathered near screens, glass railings, break rooms, trading desks, loading docks, and maintenance closets. In the auditorium, hundreds sat under soft lights while rain moved against the tall windows behind the podium. Ava stood alone, no logo behind her, no banner, no music. She could see Marcus near the back wall. Nina stood near a side aisle, pale and watchful. Evelyn sat with both hands locked around her purse. Charles sat in the front row, unreadable. Richard sat 2 seats away from him, calm enough to seem innocent. Ava began quietly. 20 years ago, a maintenance supervisor named Daniel Brooks was blamed for financial misconduct inside this company. The room tightened. Most employees were told he acted alone. Most investors were told the matter was resolved. Most executives moved on. She paused. His family did not. A low murmur moved through the room. Ava continued. Daniel Brooks was my father. The stillness deepened. I am restricted from discussing certain archived materials today. But no court order can stop this company from asking why a man with inconsistent access records became the public face of a scandal that protected people above him. Richard's jaw moved once. Ava saw it. She did not stop. This morning, serious questions were raised about current merger language that may affect employee benefit obligations. Effective immediately, I am requesting suspension of the merger vote pending employee impact review. I am requesting an independent review of bonus structures connected to disputed offshore partnerships. And I am creating a protected channel for employees who know where old truths were buried. Someone near the back began to clap. Marcus. Then another worker joined. Then a cafeteria employee. Then a security guard. The applause started to spread, uncertain at first, then stronger. For one brief moment, the room lifted. Then every phone in the auditorium began buzzing at once. Not 1, not 10, hundreds. A wave of alerts rippled through the seats like electricity. Ava saw faces change while people looked down. Mara Whitfield had published a breaking update. Federal investigators seek interview with Ava Brooks over timing of Whitmore acquisition and confidential archive materials. The applause fractured. Some hands stopped midair. A man in the second row whispered, "Oh no." Richard stood slowly, not smiling, not triumphant, only grave. That was worse. Charles looked at him, then at Ava, and the small movement told Ava enough. Richard had waited for her highest emotional moment to open the floor beneath it. Two federal investigators entered at the back of the auditorium before Ava could leave the podium. They did not rush. They did not need to. The audience watched them walk down the aisle while Ava remained under the lights. The workers she had just reached now stared at her with a new question in their eyes. Not whether Daniel had been innocent. Whether Ava had just become dangerous too. The investigators were polite, which made them more frightening. They did not accuse Ava of anything directly. They asked for timelines, communications, funding sources, acquisition strategy, Blackstone Ridge negotiations, and whether she had received any internal Whitmore materials before buying the controlling stake. Her outside counsel sat beside her in a frosted glass conference room while the building outside rearranged itself around rumor. Ms. Brooks, the SEC investigator said, did you possess any internal Whitmore documents before the acquisition closed? No. Did anyone acting on your behalf? Not to my knowledge. Did Blackstone Ridge disclose unresolved legacy liabilities before the transaction? No. Then why did you pursue control of this company so aggressively? Ava looked at the woman across from her. Because the public filings showed weakness. Because the merger structure looked rushed. Because governance patterns suggested concealment. And because of your father. Ava held her gaze. Because of what this company did to my father. The investigator wrote something down. That small movement felt like a blade. 94 minutes later, Ava walked out to find the board waiting. Not all of them. Enough. Richard stood at the center with a document in his hand. Charles stood slightly behind him, silent. Pending regulatory clarification, Richard said. The board will vote at 6 p.m. on whether to suspend your operational authority until the inquiry is resolved. Ava looked around the hallway. Several employees had stopped nearby. Everyone was listening without appearing to listen. You cannot suspend what you have not formally granted, she said. Richard nodded. Correct. Which is why the motion will recommend delaying your installation indefinitely. The sentence hit exactly where he aimed it. Ava had ownership. She had documents. She had wounded truth. But by sunset, she might have no chair, no access, and no legal path to use either. And if the vote fails? Ava asked. Richard looked almost sad. Then regulators may do what this board should have done. Charles finally spoke. Richard, enough. But it did not sound like command. It sounded like regret arriving without teeth. Richard did not even turn toward him. Ava understood then that Charles was no longer driving the machine. Maybe he never had been. Charles did not bring Ava the box like an offering. He brought her a mistake. At 4:41 p.m., less than 90 minutes before the board vote, he appeared outside the borrowed office with a storage inventory sheet in his hand and a face that looked 10 years older than it had that morning. There was a transfer, he said. Ava did not stand. Of what? Your father's belongings. Storage sent them to my office years ago. I kept some items in archive. You kept them from my family. Yes. No defense. No explanation. Just the word. Ava rose slowly. Why tell me now? Charles looked down at the inventory sheet. Because one item on the original list is not in the archive cage anymore. What item? Portable radio. Black casing. Worn headphones. Ava felt the room narrow. Her father's radio. The one he carried on night shifts. The one he played on late buses when he thought she was asleep. Where is it? According to the current catalog, disposed of during storage consolidation. Ava stared at him. Disposed of? That is what the record says. And do you believe it? Charles hesitated. No, for the first time, Ava saw fear in him that was not for himself. They went down to the sub-basement with Marcus, Nina, and Ava's attorney. The archive cage held boxes labeled by year, but the D. Brooks inventory was wrong. The jacket was there. The thermos was there. Maintenance logs were there. The radio was not. Marcus cursed under his breath. Nina checked the catalog terminal. There was a disposal order 5 years after Daniel died. Ava looked at her. The same year locker B14 was opened. Nina nodded. Authorized by legal. But the disposal vendor code is invalid. It was never picked up. Marcus suddenly turned toward the far wall. Wait. He walked to an old shelf of obsolete equipment, radios, pagers, desk phones, broken intercom units, things nobody wanted but nobody had approved throwing away. He began moving boxes, muttering to himself. Facilities never throws away anything that might be needed during a blackout. Never. Ava joined him. Charles stood back, useless for once. Nina searched the shelf labels. Ava's attorney watched the corridor. The board vote was 73 minutes away. Then Marcus pulled a dusty plastic bin from behind a stack of cable reels. Ava. Inside were 6 portable radios. 4 gray, 1 blue, 1 black. Worn headphones wrapped around it. Ava picked it up with both hands. Her throat closed. It was lighter than memory and heavier than evidence. He used to let me listen to one earbud, she whispered. The battery compartment was corroded shut. Marcus handed her a small screwdriver. Ava pried carefully. The cover snapped loose. Inside was no cassette, no obvious recording, no miracle waiting in plain sight. Only dead batteries and a thin strip of plastic wedged behind the springs. Nina leaned closer. That panel should not be there. Ava used the edge of locker B14's key to pry it loose. A microcassette slid into her palm. For a moment, no one breathed. Charles whispered, "I did not know." Ava did not look at him. "You knew enough to hide the box." "Yes." "Then this part is not yours." They found an old recorder in facilities after Marcus threatened to wake every retired maintenance worker in Queens if he had to. The tape hissed. Static. A scrape of furniture. Then younger voices emerged, thin but clear enough to pull 20 years into the room. A man said, "Access logs do not support Brooks." Another voice answered, smooth and controlled, "The public will not read access logs. They will read one name." Ava's hand tightened around the table edge. The tape crackled. A third voice, younger Charles, strained and uncertain. "If this becomes criminal, we cannot contain it." The smooth voice replied, "Then contain it before it becomes criminal." Static swallowed several seconds. Then came the sentence Evelyn had remembered. "He is low enough to be believable." The tape cut out. Not a full confession. Not the whole offshore scheme. Not enough by itself to explain every stolen dollar. But enough to prove the official story had been constructed around a man they knew the access logs did not support. Enough to reopen Kingston. Enough to make Richard Ellison's denials dangerous. Nina looked at Ava. "If we combine this with Schedule 12, the altered HR packet, and the redacted access logs, it creates a pattern." Ava nodded. "Not a miracle." Marcus looked at the radio. "A map." Ava looked at the clock. The board vote was in 41 minutes. The tape did not end the fight. It changed the battlefield. Ava's attorney secured the cassette, the radio, the archive inventory sheet, and witness signatures from Marcus, Nina, Charles, and the facility's supervisor who found the recorder. By 5:28 p.m., federal investigators had been notified. By 5:41, Richard learned something had been found. By 5:47, the board meeting began without him in the chair he had expected to control. He entered at 5:52 with 2 outside attorneys and 1 final weapon. "This board must suspend Ms. Brooks immediately," he said. "She has continued unauthorized evidence collection during an active regulatory inquiry." Ava stood across the table from him. The evidence was preserved under counsel's supervision. From company storage. From a mislabeled disposal record authorized by legal. That stopped him for half a second. Only half. "You are not an investigator," Richard said. "And you are not a judge." Nina stepped forward from the wall. Her voice shook, but she spoke. "No, but I am compliance. And the same legal authorization code used on the disposal record appears in the current merger side letter removal." Richard turned toward her slowly. "Ms. Patel, you should think carefully before making allegations you cannot survive professionally." Marcus stood next. "Funny thing about people downstairs," he said. "We survive all kinds of things people upstairs think should scare us." Charles rose last. The room went silent before he spoke because everyone understood what his standing meant. "I signed Daniel Brooks's termination letter," he said. "I allowed this institution to blame him despite unresolved access inconsistencies. And I will testify that Richard Ellison advised the board to close the inquiry before the facts were complete." Richard's face changed at last. "Not much. Enough. Charles," he said softly. "Do not confuse guilt with memory." Ava placed the sealed evidence receipt on the table. "Federal investigators are on their way up." Richard looked toward the doors. For 1 second, the story nearly became physical. Not violence. Escape. Calculation. The instinct of a man who had spent his life finding exits before consequences entered. Then the doors opened, and the investigators stepped inside. Real collapse was quiet after that. Access revoked. Phones surrendered. Offices sealed. Counsel requested. The merger suspended. Blackstone Ridge notified. Board members suddenly remembering concerns. Executives who had spoken in certainty asking whether they needed personal lawyers. Richard was not dragged away in spectacle. He walked out between two attorneys, still upright, still composed, but stripped of the one thing that had made him dangerous. The room no longer believed he controlled the paper. The next morning, Whitmore Global did not wake up healed. It woke up exposed. Regulators requested all communications tied to Kingston, current employee benefit transfers, offshore partnerships, executive bonus distributions, the Blackstone Ridge sale, and the internal source of the acquisition leak. The suspended merger became a crime scene of clauses. Within 48 hours, the leak was traced to a crisis communications consultant retained through Richard's office, using a media contact to frame Ava as a hostile outsider before she could speak to employees directly. Blackstone Ridge denied wrongdoing while quietly admitting it had known of unresolved legacy liabilities before selling its stake. Then regulators found something worse. Blackstone had not merely wanted out. It had pushed the sale forward while preparing a short position through an affiliated fund, betting Whitmore would fall after the liabilities surfaced and expecting Ava Brooks to become the public face of the collapse. The firm was forced into a separate settlement review. Its affiliate trades were frozen, and its executives were summoned to explain why they had sold control while hiding what they already knew. Several Whitmore board members resigned from committees by noon. Others stayed long enough to insist they had always wanted transparency. They said it in the same voices they had once used to approve silence. Richard was placed on administrative leave before the market closed and formally removed the following day. His office remained sealed, not because anyone expected to find one final document that explained everything, but because the point of men like Richard was never one document. It was the system of documents that made cruelty look procedural. Charles Whitmore announced he would cooperate with investigators. He did not call it bravery. No one should have. It was testimony arriving 20 years late. Ava was installed as CEO at 9 a.m., 2 days after the first boardroom laugh. Not with applause. Not with champagne. With a signed emergency resolution, 3 abstentions, 2 resignations, and a company still shaking under the weight of what had been uncovered. She sat in the CEO chair only after asking facilities to bring in 3 additional chairs for Marcus Hill, Nina Patel, and Evelyn Carter during the first leadership meeting. The executives looked uncomfortable. Ava wanted them uncomfortable. This company has spent decades confusing silence with stability, she said. That ends now. Her first actions were not dramatic enough for cable news, but dangerous enough to change lives. Executive bonuses connected to disputed structures were frozen under independent review. Employee benefit transfers in the merger were halted. A protected whistleblower office was created outside the legal department. Custodial and maintenance pension cuts from the Kingston period were placed under restoration audit. Health coverage tiers were reviewed for discriminatory impact. The board's emergency governance clause was suspended pending rewrite. Every old disciplinary file tied to Kingston was reopened. Some people resigned before they could be questioned. Others stayed and pretended they had always wanted reform. Ava learned quickly that victory did not make a damaged institution clean. It only gave her the mop and the authority to decide where to start. Charles came to her office 3 weeks later. It was raining again, softly this time, the kind of rain that made Manhattan glass look almost forgiving. He stood in the doorway without his usual assistant, without his old force. "May I come in?" Ava nodded. He entered and placed a sealed envelope on her desk. "My resignation as chairman emeritus. Effective immediately after my testimony." Ava looked at it, but did not pick it up. "You are doing this because regulators gave you no choice." "Partly. And the other part?" Charles looked toward the window. "Because I spent 40 years believing leadership meant preserving the institution at any cost. Your father paid that cost. So did your mother. So did people I never bothered to know." Ava studied him. "Do not ask me to forgive you." He shook his head. "I am not." The quiet after that felt honest enough to remain unfilled. Then Charles removed something from his pocket and placed it beside the envelope. A small silver maintenance pin, worn at the edges. This was in the box. I should have returned it to your family years ago. Ava picked it up. Her father had worn that pin every night after earning it for 10 years of service. She remembered him polishing it with the corner of a dish towel before work, joking that if the executives could wear gold cufflinks, he could wear silver proof that he knew how to keep their floors shining. Her fingers closed around it. He was proud of this place, she said. I know. That is what makes it worse. Charles nodded. Yes. He left without asking for anything. Ava respected that more than she wanted to. 3 months later, morning sunlight poured through the lobby of Whitmore Global Capital and turned the marble floors warm instead of cold. From the outside, the building still looked like power. 72 floors of glass, steel, money, ambition, and weather reflected back at the city. Inside, certain things had changed in ways visitors might not notice and workers noticed immediately. Security guards greeted custodial staff by name. Executives waited their turn at elevators. The maintenance break room had new chairs, not old ones rejected from conference renovations. Health coverage notices no longer divided employees into human tiers disguised as administrative categories. Near the elevator bank, where every employee and visitor had to pass, a plaque had been installed at eye level. Daniel Brooks, in honor of integrity, dignity, and the unseen hands that carry every institution forward. Ava stood before it at 6:15 a.m., holding coffee she had not tasted. Marcus Hill stopped beside her with a supply card and looked at the plaque. Your daddy would have complained, he said. Ava smiled. That it cost too much. Exactly. They stood there while the building entered morning. Analysts with backpacks, assistants with coffee, cleaners finishing night shifts, senior managers who now slowed at the plaque because not slowing said too much. A young intern stopped and read every word. Then she looked at Ava. Was he important? Marcus looked down. Ava looked at her father's name. Yes, she said. But that is not why the plaque is here. The intern seemed confused. Ava turned toward her. It is here because important people are not always the ones a building teaches you to notice. The intern nodded slowly, then walked toward the elevators, still looking back at the name. A few minutes later, Charles Whitmore entered through the revolving doors carrying a small cardboard box. He had retired 6 weeks earlier. Newspapers called it graceful. Ava knew grace was too clean a word for a man leaving ruins he had helped build. Still, he looked different now, smaller in the way men become when history stops holding them up. He approached without asking for warmth. That was wise. More items were recovered during the archive review, he said. Ava opened the box. Photographs, maintenance logs, a faded thermos, a bus transfer tucked inside an old paperback. The portable radio, sealed now in a protective case after investigators preserved the tape. Beneath it was a folded paper. Ava opened it. A resignation letter dated 20 years earlier. Charles Whitmore's signature at the bottom. Never submitted. You almost left, Ava said. Charles kept his eyes on the plaque. For one night, I understood what we had done. By morning, I accepted the argument that staying would protect more people than leaving. He exhaled slowly. I was always good at accepting arguments that let me keep power. Ava folded the letter and placed it back into the box. She picked up the radio. Investigators had returned it after copying the evidence, and for the first time it was no longer only proof. It was her father's. Marcus reached into his cart and pulled out a small pack of batteries. Thought you might want to know if it still plays. Ava stared at him, then laughed softly through the ache in her throat. You planned this. Maintenance plans for everything. He helped her open the compartment and slide the batteries in. The radio crackled. Static first. Then a thin ribbon of jazz slipped through the old speaker, faint, scratched, alive. Ava closed her eyes. For one impossible second, she was back on a late-night bus in Queens with her father beside her, one earbud in her ear, the city moving past dark windows while he whispered, "Listen close, baby girl." Even tired things can still carry music. When she opened her eyes, the lobby had not stopped. Elevators chimed. Wheels squeaked against marble. Phones rang upstairs. Markets opened. The building breathed. Charles stood silently beside the plaque, tears in his eyes he did not ask anyone to honor. Marcus wiped one hand across his face and pretended it was dust. Ava held the radio against her chest and looked at the name Daniel Brooks carved into metal where no one entering Whitmore Global could avoid seeing it. She had once believed power meant reaching the highest room in the building. Now she understood that real power was changing what the building was forced to remember. Every morning after that, when executives crossed the lobby beneath Daniel Brooks's name, when janitors pushed carts past bankers, when assistants stood beside directors without lowering their eyes, Whitmore Global carried a lesson it had paid 20 years too late to learn. The people you refuse to see are not beneath the institution. They are the foundation. And when the foundation finally speaks, even the highest room has to listen.